Hey guys, good evening and shalom to everybody who is joining us tonight. I am Pastor Dave Sain, Senior Shepherd at Living Manna Church. You are part of our Wednesday night Bible study, and I am honored that you have chosen tonight to hang out with me and to go through Yah's Word and explore the things that are in it. And just learn, just try to understand what this whole story is really about. Thank you again for being part of our study tonight. Make sure that if you are joining us on YouTube or whether it's Facebook, that especially if it's YouTube, if you make sure that you hit that little red button. If it's red, it means you're not subscribed. Subscribe to it, hit the bell. You'll be notified every time we go live. And we do so a couple of different times a week. We got Wednesday Bible study. We've got Hidden Manna on Shabbat. We've got our weekend evangelism service. We got so much going on throughout the week that you're going to want to definitely be part of. But again, thank you so much for being part of tonight's study. I really, really appreciate that. We've got some exciting stuff to go through tonight, some stuff that I think you'll be very, very interested in. And before we do that, though, I do want to give a quick shout out and really a prayer request. Please, please, please pray for Sister Lily Estrada. She just had back surgery and she's still in ICU with it. Hopefully she'll be out tomorrow, but the family is definitely requesting prayer. Brother Randy, our hearts go out to you. Sister Lily, our hearts go out to you. We pray for a complete and total healing, that Yah would allow our bodies to do what they do. We pray that God used wisdom for the doctors. And I just wanted to put that out there. So make sure, guys, that you pray about that. Bring it up before Yah. We want a complete and total healing for our sister. Get back up on our feet. Get back to living the life that she's supposed to live in the Master. So I wanted to give that shout out to everybody and just say hello to everybody that is joining us on the chat room. Thank you so much, guys. Keep the chat going. Let us know where you're watching from. A whole bunch of different conversations can go on there. I got some really interesting stuff that I know is going to spark some conversation tonight. So let it rip. If you got questions, certainly go into the comments, leave your questions there. We'll do our best to try to answer them. But with all of that, let's open up with a word of prayer, and then we'll jump right into it for tonight. Father, as we say each week, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that is willing to obey. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay, so we've been in Thessalonians. Well, actually, we've been in the introduction to Thessalonians for quite a while. We just got into a couple of verses the last week. Just a reminder, I forgot to say, guys, the notes should be available in the description. I'm not sure if they're on the app or not, but they are definitely in the description section. So you can get the notes, you can download them, you can have them on your iPad, you can have them on your phone. And they're going to be up on the screen anyway. You can follow along that way. But if you want references later on that you can look up these verses, that would be absolutely awesome. Tonight, and we've gone through some, like I said, we've gone through a couple of different weeks or maybe 3 weeks of introduction. And I'm telling you, it is so vital that you understand the introduction. If this is the first study that you're listening to, don't stop. We want you to listen to it, but we want you to go back and listen to the previous studies, because it really sets the precedent for what we're going to talk about as we go through Thessalonians. You're going to find out that this is not just about Thessalonians. This is about all of the New Testament. This is about the book of Peter, 1st and 2nd. This is about James. This information that is the introduction is relevant to every other book that is written, that you understand what the mindset is that these authors have in their thoughts to explain the gospel and who they're actually talking to. So anyway, with that, here is tonight's study. It's 1 Thessalonians. We're in 1 Thessalonians. We're going to do 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. I got no idea how long this is going to go. It's going to go as long as it goes, but we're going to do 1 Thessalonians. Tonight, we're going to get into chapter 1 and verses 5 through 10. Now, we already read a couple of verses already in chapter 1, but we're going to go through verses 5 through 10. And the title or the subtitle for tonight is called Pagans or Proselytes. Pagans or Proselytes. Okay, so let's get into this for tonight. All right, guys. on your notes there, and let me maybe just make this a little bit bigger to make sure everybody can see this. You guys got a good view of all of this. It is so important, and really this is sort of the product of everything we've gone over so far. I want you to understand, intricately and intimately understand, the outline that Yeshua has given us about what we today commonly call the end times. But the way Yeshua gives it, while it is the end times and the wrath of Yah, it's not exactly what you and I have been told over the years, i.e. the second coming of the Master. And it's not that the Bible doesn't talk about the second coming of the Master. It does. It absolutely does. And we'll deal with that when we get to that point. But it is important to be able to accurately divide the scripture, to understand what is actually being talked about, and not to add to it and not to take away from it, but to understand it in its proper context. And here is the outline that the Master, Yeshua himself, has given to us, again, in Mark 13, in Luke 21, in Matthew 19, Matthew 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. This is the outline that Yeshua has given to us. And here it is on the notes there. Number one, Judah is going to kill the Son. Now, of course, we're looking at it from Yeshua's perspective. This hasn't happened yet. You and I obviously are 2,000 years beyond this, so we know what happened, right? It's a historical fact. And you're going to understand that a lot of this is historical facts. So not only do we need to look at this from a very, very succinct scriptural perspective, but we also need to look at this from a very succinct historical perspective. And you're going to see the two match up. They're lock in step. It's a round peg and a round hole. So number one, Yeshua has told us in the parable of the vineyard and others that the son's going to get killed, that ultimately the father's going to send the son to the people and the people are going to kill the son. They're not just going to kill the son, though, because the Master also explicitly told us that he is going to send other prophets, other Torah teachers, scholars, and other wise men. And by that, he means the apostles, i.e. for what we're talking about in Thessalonians, we're talking about Shaul, the apostle Saul. And he does that. He sends them, and the Master tells us explicitly, you're going to persecute, you're going to kick out of the synagogues, and you're even going to kill the apostles, the prophets. Well, really, the prophets, the Torah teachers, and the wise men that the Master is going to send. And of course, they do that. And that is called tribulation. The time when the beginning of the Netzarim, for the first 40, 50 years, all the persecution that they endure for bringing this message out, that is called tribulation. The Master said, you will go through much tribulation, much affliction in getting this message out for his name. But then the Master also tells us, and this is sort of the third thing, if you're thinking about it as a timeline, that there are going to be wars and rumors of wars and pestilence and earthquakes and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You guys know Matthew 24, the first couple of verses, you can read through it. But he tells us all of those things are birth pangs. They are not descriptions of what is going on now. Because, guys, all of these things have been going on throughout history from every age. And it's been going on in our own age over and over and over and over again. And I know there are prophecy teachers out there that are, just telling people, look, the birth pangs are coming and war and rumors. Guys, that's been going on for 2,000 years. He's referring to what was going on in Jerusalem leading up to the destruction of the temple. These are called the birth pangs. So something is about to be birthed out of Jerusalem. All the hardship that's going to come to Jerusalem, destruction and everything else, it is also going to produce a birthing, children are going to come out of even the destruction of the temple, even the destruction of Jerusalem. Children of Yah are going to come out of it that are going to change the world. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. The next thing in the timeline, so to speak, that the master talks about is that there will be a Gentile army that will invade, that will surround, and obviously we're talking about Rome, because that's what happened some 40 some odd years after Messiah says these words. This army will invade, it will destroy the temple, it will kill many with the sword, and the sword will be against the people of Judah, the house of Israel, from that time forward, as they are scattered all over the world. This is called the Great Tribulation. So tribulation, if we want to sort of define these things, I guess, because if you think about most modern prophetic teachers, they'll tell you there is a tribulation coming, and they kind of maybe say, well, that might be the first 3.5 years of a tribulation, but then there's a great tribulation that lasts the last 3.5 years, but not according to Yeshua's instruction. Yeshua says tribulation occurs to the apostles and disciples and believers, both Jew and Greek, in the first 40 some odd years, but great tribulation comes upon both Jew and Gentile afterward. And that is, of course, from the time of Jerusalem on. And we know now that this has lasted some 2,000 years. However, he then goes on to tell us that the sun will be blotted out, the moon will be blotted out, the stars will fall from the sky. These are not, I do not believe these are astronomical events. I don't think we're supposed to be watching for the moon to be blotted out and the sun to be blotted out, because people look at solar eclipses and lunar eclipses and meteorites falling, and all that's interesting. I get it. All that's interesting, but I do not think that is the context to which he's talking, because we have to find these definitions somewhere else in Scripture. And what I think he's saying is that the sun will no longer give its light, the moon will no longer give its light, and the stars of heaven will fall. Well, the sun and the moon is a biblical reference to the house of Israel, who was supposed to be the light of the world, a city set on a hill, not putting its lamp underneath a bed, but letting it shine brightly. But if the city is to be destroyed, and the house is to be destroyed, and the nation is to be destroyed, then as Joseph in his dream saw the sun and the moon and the stars bowing down to him, the light of that entity will not shine again. It will be darkened, and it will stay darkened throughout the Great Tribulation, the time that the sword is against them. And of course, he also tells us connected to that is the anguish of the nations, the fear in men's hearts over the things that are coming. And I really believe that he is talking about 2,000 years of history, of continued war and continued death and continued pestilence and continued rape and murder and et cetera, that has gone on throughout all of history, all the way up to where we are today. Guys, I saw some one, I don't even want to mention his name, but one Bible guy. He does something called Apocalypse Now, and every week he's talking about this is it. This is Gog Magog. This is Russia coming now. We're looking at what's going on in Ukraine, and it's just week after week after week of this hype, of this anxiety to put us on the edge of our seats, when really what these verses are talking about is a destruction of Jerusalem. It's not to say that those things aren't real. They are real. Russia is doing what it's doing. America's doing what it's doing. The UN is doing what it's doing. NATO's doing what it's doing. And my goodness, guys, anything can happen. A war can happen anywhere. You know, people that were there at World War I never thought that would happen, but it happened. World War II never thought that would happen, but it happened. And all the wars since. So all of those things can go on. But that is not what Matthew 24 is talking about. It's talking about a very specific set of circumstances to which the apostles of the first century should be looking at to know that very soon, the very thing the master said, not one stone left upon another, was about to happen in Jerusalem. So the anguish and the fear of the nations, and we know, because we're at 2,000 years later, this has been going on for 2,000 years. Every generation, guys, every generation from Jerusalem on, from when Jerusalem had a temple all the way till today, every generation has had fear in the hearts of men at the expectation of the things that are coming upon them in their culture, whether it was pestilence or disease or black plague or crusades or death or marauders, and the list goes on and on and on and on. This is what I believe the Master is talking about. And then ultimately, after all of that goes on, or from, again, our perspective, at least, I'm not saying it is just 2,000 years, it could be 2020, it could be 2030, I don't know. But right now, it's been approximately 2,000 years. Then, at some point, the Son of Man is going to split the sky and descend on the clouds and reign and rule over this earth. That is the second coming. All the rest of it is a description of the day of the Lord, the destruction of Jerusalem. We're going to get more into that in just a few minutes. So all of that is just kind of review of where we are, but I want to refresh your memory. So as we get into some of Thessalonians, you keep that in your mindset. And of course, again, I encourage you, go back and listen to some of the other studies that we have talked about. So, question that I want to kind of pose to us today. The people of Thessalonica, right? Who are they? What's their story? Now, we got into this a little bit last week, and we're going to talk about it some more. But the question is, and really, I guess really sort of one of the themes for tonight is, were these people proselytes or were these people pagans? Because a proselyte in the scripture, a proselyte are Gentiles who have come to an understanding. They become converts to Judaism, or to what was Judaism of the first century. And they had to go through all sorts of rituals and rules. They're called halakha. All sorts of rituals and rules and memorizations, and ultimately a circumcision for adult men. And then you would be considered part of the body, not exactly equal with natural born, but you would be considered a worshiper of God. You would have converted to the worship of the God of Israel. At least that's the way they set it up. And so if you were a proselyte, there was this format that you would have to go through. And this is very apparent even in our New Testament writings, because there were lots of Pharisees, lots of people who had become believers, but still thought this was the way we need to bring Gentiles in, according to the traditions that were already established. And you're going to see that those traditions are not what Yah had in mind for the Gentiles. They are what religious Judaism, Pharisaic Judaism of its day, had in mind for Gentiles, but it was not what Yah had in mind for the Gentiles. So proselytes. And now, thankfully, as he is the master. He knows all. He knows what questions we're going to ask. He specifically talked to us about the proselytes who come as converts out of Pharisaic Judaism. And here's Matthew chapter 23:15. I know that you know this, but now let's put it in this context. Listen to what Yeshua says about proselytes, about going out as Pharisees and bringing Gentile converts in. The Master says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you go about the land and the sea, all over the place, to win one convert." And if in other versions, it would actually say one proselyte. It's what it means. A convert is a proselyte. "And when he is won, you make him a son of Gehenna." And Gehenna here, Gehennom, which is the way it says it in the scriptures version, but Gehenna is in fact an analogy to the lake of fire. So in fact, what the master is saying about proselytes to Pharisaic Judaism is you have made them two times more people who will burn in the lake of fire than they were before, which is, I mean, that's just mind-boggling to me, right? I mean, that's just crazy. So, are these people in Thessalonica, are they proselytes? Well, perhaps, maybe, some, but we'll get there. See, the thing is, the Word of God has always had a plan for the Gentiles. Now, we've been going through the book of Isaiah in our morning mannas for a long time. We've been doing it for months and months and months, or for a couple of months anyway. And we're almost at the end. I think we got one more devotion coming out of the book of Isaiah. But I really hope that you guys have been listening, because I've been kind of telling a parallel story in the book of Isaiah, which is complementary to all the Wednesday nights and, of course, to what we're doing on our weekend evangelism messages. All of it comes together. And so if you've been listening to the morning mannas, a lot of this will make sense to you. We're going to go over some verses that we've talked about before, but we're going to put them in correct context. Yah has always had in mind to bring the nations to himself. But before the nations could be brought to himself, he had to bring the people called Israel to himself as the example, and to be the priest and the teachers and the example and the people that give instruction to the nations. At least that's the way it was initially set up. Here is just a couple of verses, and I want you to be very, very sensitive to this idea that it's not a New Testament idea that the gospel's gone out to the nations. That's not a New Testament idea. That is something Yah has been saying right from the beginning when he calls Abram, Abraham, instead of father of many, father of nations. It has always been Yah's intent. So here is Isaiah chapter 56. It's up on the screen there. I highlighted some things. Remember, guys, if it's the first time watching, you see stuff in red or any other color except yellow, is just me trying to emphasize something. But if you see it in yellow, that's kind of me just adding some personal commentary to try to emphasize what's being said. So anyway, here's Isaiah chapter 56 and verses 6 through 8. Now, this is important stuff because, guys, most of us, not all of us, but most of us come from the Gentile nations, right? Come from the peoples. And so it's kind of really important that we understand how we fit into this whole thing, how it is that we are part of this. Because you'll hear from Judaism, it's just about Israel. You'll hear from church, well, it's just about Gentiles. When the truth is, it's not just about the Jews and the 12 tribes, and it's not just about the nations. It's about all of them together. This has always been Yah's plan. So here's Isaiah chapter 56, verses 6 to 8, some stuff we've gone over, but listen to it carefully. It says, and you can read the whole chapter, chapter 56. It's a wonderful, wonderful chapter. I'm just pulling out pieces here for time's sake for tonight. It says, also the sons of the foreigner, and that is the Gentiles, the nations, the peoples. In other words, not native born to what at that time would have been considered the house of Israel. So also the sons of a foreigner who join themselves to Yehovah, to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, to serve him and to love the name of Yah, to be his servants, all who guard the Sabbath and not profane it, and are holding on to my covenant. Let's stop there for a second, because what Isaiah just gave us is the outline of how Gentiles come. They come this way. They need to join themselves to Yehovah. They need to serve him the way God explains service through the nation of Israel. We need to love him the way the Shema tells us to love him, and to be his servants on our forehead and on our hands, on the fronts of our houses and our doorpost, and to guard, to keep his Sabbath, Sabbaths really, but his Sabbath, and to not profane it, and to hold on to the covenant he has made with us. This is a description of what all Gentiles should be doing. Now, I know this is very, very different than you will hear sort of modern religion describe this, but Isaiah is describing the ministry of Yeshua. The whole book of Isaiah is the equivalent of the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It tells the same story in a little bit different order, in a lot of prophetic sort of ways of analogous ways, but it tells the whole story of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so he's telling us here in Isaiah, this is how Gentiles will come, and this is what Gentiles must do in order to be his people. Verse 7 then says, "Then I shall bring to my set-apart mountain." Now, the set-apart mountain he's speaking about here is the New Jerusalem. It's not the old Jerusalem. It's the real set-apart mountain. It's not the earthly example. It's the real example. "To his New Jerusalem, and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their ascending offerings and their slaughterings are accepted on my slaughter place, for my house is called a house of prayer for all the nations." All peoples, all nations. That is what Yah's temple, whether it was from Solomon's day or in Yeshua's day, that's what it was supposed to be. And that's what it will be, at least in the kingdom. I said New Jerusalem, but really we're talking about the kingdom time. That's what it will be for all the nations. "For my house is called a house of prayer for all the peoples. The master, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, who gathers the outcast of Israel." So what's one of the things the master is doing? He is, over the last 2,000 years, gathering the outcast of Israel from generation to generation. Those who are of the house of Israel that have believed, like the Netzarim, are being gathered from generation to generation to generation. So the master who gathers the outcast of Israel, the scattered, right? The scattered, like Hosea says of the northern house, and now we know of the southern kingdom, the scattered declares, "I gather still others." Now, I know that others is in italics, which means it's not actually a word that appears in the original text, but it's accurate to the context of the text. Because even if you're saying, "I gather still to him besides those who are gathered to him," in English, that doesn't, I guess you can make sense of it, but it doesn't grammatically make sense. So they stick the word others in there. And I think this is correct in this particular instance. He says, "I gather still others to him," the Gentiles, the nations, the peoples, besides those of the scattered of the house of Israel that he is gathering to him. So there is a twofold purpose that Isaiah tells us is going to go on in the future. When this suffering servant comes, he is going to gather over time. Now, there's no sense of time in what Isaiah is saying here, but again, we are at the end of all of this, so we can look back and we can say, okay, he's talking about what's kind of gone on throughout history. Yah is gathering the outcast of Israel scattered amongst all the nations, but he is also gathering the faithful of all the nations who choose to come, the foreigners who choose to serve him, to love the name of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, to be his servants, to guard his Sabbaths, and to not profane them, and to hold on to the new covenant, the renewed covenant. This is what Isaiah tells us. So this idea of the nations coming is not new. I know we say this all the time that this is a New Testament concept. No, this is the plan of the master right from the beginning. So here's Isaiah, and we're zipping through Isaiah because we've gone through this in all of our devotions. So I hope this should be familiar to you guys. Here is Isaiah chapter 49 and verses 1 through 6. So more information about the gospel story, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, What's going to happen when the Mashiach comes, when salvation comes? Here is verses 1 through 6, and listen to this. It says, "Listen to me, O coastlands, and hear you people from afar. Yod He Vav He has called me from the womb." Stop right there a second, because you got to understand what's being said. Who was called from the womb? Who's going to change the whole world? Yeshua, right? Yeshua was called from. Goes to Mary, says, the Spirit of God's going to come upon you. You're going to give birth to salvation itself. His name becomes salvation. That's what Isaiah is talking about here. So put this in the context of the scripture. Yod He Vav He has called me from the womb. From my mother's belly, he has caused my name. And what is his name? His name is salvation. His name is Yeshua. His name is Yehusha. Whatever way you want to say it, his name means salvation. That's who he is. So from his mother's womb, because this is what the angel tells Mary, this is what you'll name him. From the womb, this is what he was named. He has, from my mother's belly, he has caused my name, salvation Yeshua, to be remembered. And he made my mouth like a sharp sword. Well, Hebrews chapter 4, what is a two-edged sword, a two-edged sharp sword? It is the word of Yah. What did Yeshua come to teach us? Or who is he actually? He is the Son, but he is the very living word of Yah. From his mouth comes a sharp two-edged sword. We see this later on in Revelation as well. This is also a reference to that. So he says he has caused like a sharp sword, in the shadow of his hand, he hid me. Messiah, Mashiach, Yeshua, was unseen as Elohim, as the Shema, and they didn't recognize him when he came. Every time he tells them, I am, I'm this, I am this, I am this, I am before Abraham. It was unseen to them. They didn't see it. They couldn't grasp it. They couldn't wrap their minds around it. He was unseen to them. So Yah, in the shadow of his hand, hid Mashiach, so that those with eyes to see and ears to hear, they would understand. But if not, you wouldn't. And he made me a polished shaft, a tool, a weapon, is really what that winds up to say. In his quiver, in Father's quiver, he hid me. And he said to me, you are my servant, O Israel. Now, why does he call him O Israel here? Because Mashiach is the king of Israel. He represents Israel in every way. We are grafted into him, and being grafted into him is being grafted into Israel. So he says, you are, so, and unfortunately what winds up happening is a lot of Judaism interprets this as Israel, Judah, at least the time of the first century, they are the example, or that Israel today, scattered all over the place, they are supposed to be the example. If that's the case, they have done a terrible, terrible job of being the witness to the world. And that's not what this says. Listen to what this says about this Israel, the King of Israel, in whom I am adorned. And I said, I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for emptiness and in vain. What is he talking about? Well, think about all the conversations the master has with the Pharisees, with the Sadducees, with the priests, with the scribes. How many times does he tell them, you're of your father, the devil. You're not my children. You do not hear my voice. You do not believe Moses. Just over and over and over again. He's talking about, I've told them and told them and told them, and in vain they have not listened. I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for emptiness, and in vain, your father is the devil. But my right ruling is with Yod He Vav He, and my work with Elohim. Remember, Yeshua says, so long as Father works, I work too. Well, this is what this is saying. This is what Isaiah is saying. He's saying the same words Yeshua says in the Gospel of John. I'm thinking, I don't know if it's chapter 5 or I think it's chapter 5, where he says, the Father works and I work too. Well, that's what this is saying. By my right rulings is Yod He Vav He, and my work with Elohim. The Father works and the Son works too. And verse 5, and now says Yod He Vav He, again, who formed me from the womb. We're talking about the virgin birth, right? That's what he's saying. Who formed me from the womb, from the virgin birth, to be his servant. And here's why. Here is the purpose of the servanthood. Here is the initial or the primary purpose of Yeshua coming. Now, ultimately, yes, it's coming to save the whole world. John 3:16, for Yah so loved the whole, but Yah so loved the whole world, he gave his only begotten Son. You guys know that verse. But there's an order to things. To the Jew first, to the house of Israel first, and then also to the Gentile. And so he says here, who formed me from the womb to be his servant, to do what? To bring Yaakov, Jacob, back to him. Why does Messiah come? What is the initial and primary purpose of Mashiach coming? To bring Jacob, Yaakov, back to Elohim. And it tells us that right in the gospel accounts. It says he is set there for the rise and the fall of many. When the angel comes, it says he is set there to save his people. He is a Hosea. He's going to save. He is Yeshua, who is Hosea. He is the one to save his people. That's what's being said here. I'm telling you, Isaiah is literally the four gospels in a synopsis. To save his people Israel, though, here it is, I put it in blue so it pops out at you, though Israel is not gathered to him. Not in Isaiah's day, and certainly not in Yeshua's day, and certainly not today as well. Israel is not gathered to him. Not yet. Not in totality anyway, all that is Israel. And it goes on to say, yet I am esteemed or glorified in the eyes of Yod He Vav He. And my Elohim has been my strength. Of course, that is the strength of Yeshua the Father. And he says, shall it be a small matter for you to be my servant? Two, and here it is, this is the twofold reason for Mashiach coming. To raise up the tribes of Yaakov, Jacob, and to bring back the preserved ones of Israel. That's really one thing. That's really sort of the A, or the first part of it, to raise up the tribes of Israel and to bring back the preserved ones. Those ones. Remember, Yah's callings are without repentance. They may be enemies for us right now, but Yah's calling is without repentance, and they could be grafted in at any time. And many are grafted in every age. So to raise up Yaakov and to bring back the preserved ones of Israel, and I put it in blue there so you can see there's two parts to this. And this servant I shall give you as a light to the nations, to the Gentiles, to the peoples, to be my deliverance to the ends of the earth. So why does this one who is called from the womb, called the servant of Yod He Vav He, in whose very mouth is the word of God, why does he come? To bring back Jacob, Yaakov, back to their God, to get the scattered ones and bring them back, but also, and equally as important, to become a light for the nations, to bring the nations as well. And certainly this involves you and I. I mean, if you don't have, if you can't, if your family tree doesn't somehow connect to, physically to the people of Israel, it doesn't matter, because this is still the very mission that the Messiah took upon himself, that Father gave him to do. So just a couple of scriptures talking to us about really the gospel story here in Isaiah. And I hope that as I give you these little PDP versions, you can start to see how this is the very story of the Gospels. Now, here's the kicker, guys, because it's going to get more interesting right now. And I alluded to this in one of our morning mannas, but I want to go through it in more detail now so that you can see it, that you can see this is the outline that we've been talking about for weeks now in our introduction to get into the book of Thessalonians. Here is Isaiah 66. Now we're going to go through verses 5 to 21, which is to, I think, just about the end of the chapter, maybe a couple of verses short of the chapter. But I wanted to go over all of it so that you understand its context, because most of the time, the way it's taught, the way people look at it, both from a traditional religious perspective, and I've heard many even from a Torah, Hebrew roots, a Netzarim, whatever you want to call it, perspective, also use this same perspective. And I think it is inaccurate. I think once you understand the context here, what has gone on historically, that you begin to realize the words that Isaiah is using. And yes, he talks about a new heaven and a new earth, but he's talking about that as the end product of all of this stuff. But before the new heaven and new earth can come, these things also need to occur. And here it is, chapter 66. So this is, and again, what winds up happening is a lot of people teach this as this is the second coming of Messiah. This is when he's going to come in a whirlwind of fire and judge the world, and et cetera, et cetera. And beloved, I do not think this is about the second coming, because that's not the gospel story. Messiah, in giving all of his information about the destruction of Jerusalem, gives one verse, just one verse to the second coming, and like 40 verses to the destruction of Jerusalem. And maybe in Matthew, he gives 2 verses against 40 verses of the destruction of Jerusalem. And that's not to say that the coming of the Master is not important. It is important, especially to you and I, where we are in history. But we need to understand what the context is, not add to it, not take away from it, because it says something very specific. So here is Isaiah chapter 66, verses 5 through 12. And again, I want you to keep in the back of your mind, this is not the second coming. This is not the second coming. This is the destruction of Jerusalem and what will occur after the destruction of Jerusalem, leading us to a new heaven and a new earth. Here's verse 5. It says, "Thus says Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the heavens are my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house you build for me?" So right off the bat, what's this about? He's questioning what? Where is this house that you supposedly built for me? Obviously, we're talking about the temple in Jerusalem on Mount Zion. And he says, and where is this place of rest, right? So this is a little bit sarcastic, because he's saying, you say you built this house for me? Where is this thing? He is eternal. Does God, in fact, there's scripture that says, does God dwell in a house built by men? No, absolutely not. He is eternal. He chose to put his presence there at a time, but I get ahead of myself. So where is this house you built for me? And where is the place of my rest? And all these my hand has made. And all these that exist declares Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So he's saying, look, you say you made a house for me. You made something. You didn't make anything. I made the brick and the mortar. I made the marble. I made the gold. I made I made all of that stuff. So you didn't make a house for me. I'm the one that made all of that stuff. So that's kind of the context of what he's saying here. All these my hand has made, and all these that exist declares Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Yet to such a one I look. So he's saying that the house is not really the issue, right? I made the house. You didn't make me a house. I made the house. I made all the materials for the house. But here's what I'm interested in. on him who is poor and bruised of spirit, and who trembles at my word. Guys, this should bring right back to your remembrance what we call the Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. This is exactly the words that the master is using. It's coming right out of Isaiah. And he's saying, this is who I look upon. This is the place of my dwelling. I'm not concerned with the house that I actually gave you all the materials for. That's not the place I rest. This is where I rest. This is what I'm looking for one who is poor and bruised in spirit, who trembles at my word, has reverence and fear for who I am, and awe and respect. Again, this is the master saying in the Beatitudes, in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who are persecuted. All of that comes from this. Verse 3, but whoever, listen to this, but whoever slays the bull strikes a man, whoever slaughters the lamb, and what he's saying is whoever strikes a bull like striking a man, whoever slaughters a lamb like breaking a dog's neck, whoever brings a grain offering, pig's blood, whoever burns incense, who blesses an idol. Indeed, they have chosen their own ways, and their being delights in their abomination. So he's saying, because all of these are temple attributes. These are things you do in the temple. You bring a bull, you bring slaughtering a lamb, you bring a grain offering. And he's saying, when you come and bring a bull, but it's as if you killed a man. There's, it's no difference as if you killed a man, or you slaughter a lamb. It's the same way you would break a dog's neck to kill it, to put it out of its, that has no value to him. What they were doing in the temple, he says, are their abominations. I got it in red there. It says, and their being delights, and here it is, in their abominations. It is their abominations that have led to the temple being desolate. Rome coming in is added to it, and that's an abomination in and of itself, but it's what his people did to the temple that he is most concerned with, most occupied with. What they did, the way they lessened and cheapened the offerings, cheapened the temple service, changed the temple service, did not teach his instructions. Those were abominations. Verse 4 says, I shall also choose their punishments. So this has been going on since Isaiah's day, all the way through Nebuchadnezzar, all the way up to the second temple being built, all the way through the Maccabees, all the way up to the time of Yeshua. This has been going on for a long, long time. And so what does Yah say? I'm going to choose their punishments and bring their fears upon them. Again, this is Yeshua saying, not one stone left upon another. He's got to deal with this issue of their abominations because they were supposed to be the example. And here it is, the next verse, it says, because I called, but no one answered. I spoke, and they did not hear. And they did evil before my eyes. Guys, this is all generations, from Isaiah's day all the way through to Yeshua's day. They did evil before my eyes and chose what was displeasing to me. Who? The priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. I mean, just the list goes on, because we're looking at it obviously from a first century perspective, because the master says all prophecy led up to that particular point. Isaiah goes on. So remember, guys, people read this and they think we're reading about the second coming. We're not. We're not. We're reading about what leads up to the destruction of Jerusalem and what happens after that to get us to the new heaven and the new earth. So here it is, verse 5, and it says, hear the word of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, you who tremble at his word. Well, from the perspective of the destruction of the temple, Who was it that actually trembled at his word, that listened to the servant that we just finished reading in Isaiah, that was going to come and also be not just to gather the house of Jacob together, but to also be a light to the Gentiles, which is another verse that's quoted in the Gospels about Messiah. Well, who is that? Who are the people who tremble at his word? We would know them as the Netzarim, the people of the way. But I want you to realize they are the house of Israel. They are the true house of Israel. They are the tribes as they were in the first century. That's who they were. A new nation, the master says. He's going to take the kingdom away from the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, and he's going to give it to a new people. What new people? The Netzarim. That's who he's going to give it to. And they're going to accomplish what was supposed to be being done by the whole house of Israel way before, but was not done, at least not until Messiah comes and changes things. So one more time, verse 5, hear the word of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, you who tremble at his word, the Netzarim, the people of the way. Your brothers who hate you, who cast you out for my name's sake. Guys, this is exactly out of Matthew 24 and all through Gospel of John, chapter 14, chapter 16, where the master tells them, you're going to be hated for my name's sake. They're going to toss you out of the synagogues. They're going to beat you. They're going to bring you before kings. They're even going to kill you for my name's sake. This is the tribulation that you will suffer. And then wars and rumors of wars and everything else that comes, leading up to then the Great Tribulation, Yah's final judgment on Jerusalem. So he's talking about, if we're following the timeline, he's now talking about the Netzarim who will come, who their brothers, their other brothers from Judah, from the house of Israel, are going to cast them out because of his name's sake. For his name's sake said, let Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh be glorified so that we may see our joy. So let me try to explain that. Let me say it over again so it makes sense. Hear the word of the Lord, you who tremble at his word, the Netzarim. Your brothers who hate you, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, and many from all the synagogues, who will cast you out for my name's sake, according to Matthew 24 and others, they said, let Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh be glorified, so that we may see your joy. They think, and this is how Yeshua says it within the writings of the Gospels, when they kill you, when they put you out, they think they do Yah a service. They think that what they are doing is good and right. That's what he's speaking about here. But, and here I put it in red, but they are put to shame. They are put to shame. And here's the shame that's coming for them doing this. A roaring sound from the city, wailing and crying and screaming from the city, a voice from the Hekel, the temple. That's what it is. That's what that is, the temple. A voice from the temple, a voice of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, doing what? Repaying his enemies. What enemies? Their brothers who put them out because of the name of salvation. This is the whole story of the gospel being written right in front of us, right here in Isaiah. If you know the history, you can read this and say, oh my goodness, Isaiah detailed this verbatim and Yeshua lived it and Yeshua knew it. That's why he quotes Isaiah over and over and over and over again. So what's going to be heard from the city? Because they've done this to the Netzarim, because they've done this to the master? Wailing. A roaring sound from the city, a roaring, just horrific cry is going to come from the temple. Why? Because Rome's coming. Because the wrath of Almighty God is coming in the form of a locust army that is about to destroy the city and the temple. Verse 7. And of course he says, and what is he going to do? He's going to repay his enemies. What enemies? The enemies who kicked his people out, even though they were their brothers, kicked them out because of his name. Verse 7. So what is all of this called? This coming destruction? Here it is in verse 7. And you'll notice this. You're gonna go right back to Matthew 24. Before she labored. Who labored? Jerusalem. It's Jerusalem's labor. We know it in Matthew 24 as birth pangs, right? The master says, these are the birth pangs, war, rumors of wars, pestilence, all the rest of that, and the tribulation that the Netzarim are going through. These are the birth pangs. The birth happens at the destruction of Jerusalem because something comes out of it, a brand new children that are going to change the world comes out of it. So he says, verse 7, before she labored, Jerusalem, the birth pangs, destruction, she gave birth. So think about this. Think about what's being said here. Before she went into labor, she gave birth. That just doesn't make sense, right? You know, because the whole idea of birthing is that you go into labor first, and then, of course, the child is born. No. That's not what this says. This says she gives birth before. One more time. Before she labored, she gave birth. To who? Mashiach. To salvation. To Yeshua, to Yehoshua, whatever you want to call him. That's who she gave birth to. Before a pain came to her, she was delivered of a male child. Guys, this is verbatim Revelation 12. This is exactly what Revelation 12 is trying to tell us. This story. A woman with the stars around her, with the sun and the moon, she gave birth to a male child. And the serpent was right there to destroy him, right? So before she was in labor, she gave birth. That is, Messiah comes. Before a pain came to her, she was delivered of a male child, Revelation 12 and verse 5, which is exactly what Revelation 12 verse 5 says. She was delivered of a male child who will ascend to the Father and rule with an iron rod. Verse 8, who has heard the like of this? Guys, that verse right there is telling us virgin birth. Who has ever heard of a male child being born before the mother actually went through birth pangs? I mean, just, it doesn't make sense. And yet it absolutely explicitly makes sense if you know the words of Yeshua and you understand this story. So who has heard of this? The virgin birth. Who has seen the like of these? Is a land brought forth in one day? Is a nation born at once? Now, I know a lot of people look at these verses and they say, well, this is a prophecy of 1948. Israel comes back to life. And guys, is it significance that there is an Israel today, that there is a Jerusalem today, that there are Jews in Israel? Forget about, what the historical thing is and where they came from and who's one. And forget all about that for a second. Let Yah deal with that. The fact of the matter is there are Jews in the land of Israel today. There is a Jerusalem today. Is it significant? Yes, it is significant, but not for the reasons everybody quotes. It's not for the reasons everybody thinks. He's saying here, this has nothing to do with 1948 or 1967. The birth of a nation in a day is not that nation Israel or the nation Israel of 1948. It's the people, the kingdom's going to be taken away from one people and given to another nation who will be born in one day through the resurrection. That nation begins with the Netzarim and the people of the way and all those who will be grafted in and joined. That nation was born in one day. So it's a very, very kind of touchy. I know this really steps on a lot of prophetic toes, but this is history. This is what he's actually talking about. Is a nation born at once? For as soon as Zion labored, she gave birth to her children. So first she gives birth to a son, right? And then she goes through labor And after her labor, she gives birth to children. Again, if you're just thinking about this in a very logical, 1, 2, 3, 4, A comes before B, before C, before D. This doesn't make sense. But the story, if you know the gospel story, this makes perfect sense. She gave birth to a son before she came into labor. The son dies, ascends back to the father, and she goes into labor. The dragon makes war against the woman, sends the stars, casts them down to heaven, kills the Netzarim, kills the people. They overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. That's what this is talking about. So the children she has birthed through the birth pangs, so what's going to happen is the Netzarim, even though they're ministering, even though Gentiles are coming, even though Paul's going out and so forth and so on, it is the destruction of Jerusalem that scatters not just Judah, but scatters the Netzarim some 3.5 years later, scatters them all over the world. And this gospel, by virtue of that birth pangs and the destruction of Jerusalem, is what is the impotence that gets this message into Europe, into Spain, into India, into Africa, into all of the other nations of the world. It is a destruction of Jerusalem that forces them out. That's what this is telling us. And her children were then sent out. And this is exactly the book of Revelation, chapter 12. It says that the woman, a flood comes after her, and then the serpent goes after her children that she birthed after her birth pangs, the children who have the testimony of Yeshua and keep the commandments. They're the ones who go out. Guys, this is verbatim Revelation chapter 12. For as soon as Zion labored, she gave birth to her children, the Netzarim, the scattered. To do what? To go get the Gentiles, to send this message out the same way Isaiah said it was going to happen. And of course, this is Revelation chapter 12 and verse 17. You guys can look it up. These are the children or the sons who have the testimony of Yeshua and keep the commandments. Verse 9, shall I bring to birth, shall I destroy the temple and destroy Jerusalem and not give delivery? Am I going to go all through this labor pains and not send out my children? Remember, Yeshua said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded, what do you do as Netzarim? You get out. You get birthed. You get out. You leave. Pray your flights not in winter. Pray it's not on a Sabbath day. For great tribulation is going to come upon this people. Get out. You're being birthed. Go. Go and tell the world. Shall I bring to birth and not give delivery? Says Yod-He Vav-He, shall I who give delivery restrain birth? Says your Elohim. Am I going to hold this? This has to happen, he's saying. This must happen. The birth pangs must happen, and ultimately the delivery of these children must happen in order to do everything that he said in Isaiah 56 and the other verses we read about him being a light to the nations. Here's verse 10. Verse 10 of Isaiah 66. It says, rejoice with Jerusalem. Who is what? Who is about to give birth? Well, who doesn't want to rejoice with a woman who's about to give birth, right? My niece just gave birth, right? We got little baby Breg out there. Jake and Victoria just gave birth. My son and his wife, they just gave birth. Who doesn't want to rejoice with them? You want to rejoice because something wonderful's coming out. But the birth pangs hurt. They really, I'm not talking from experience, but all you ladies, you can, chime in, give us a little information on the chat sheet, on the chat there. It hurts. It hurts a lot. But you rejoice with Jerusalem, who is about to give birth, and be glad with her. Despite the horror that's coming, despite the hardship, be glad with her. All you who love her, rejoice greatly with her. All you who mourn for her. Well, why would you be mourning for her? Because she's suffering. She's going through the birth pangs. Rome is coming. The locust army is coming. The winepress of God is coming. Mourn for her. But at the same time, a birth is coming. Mourn for her, so that you feed and shall be satisfied with the breast of her comforts. so that you drink deeply, and shall delight yourselves in her overflowing glory. For thus says Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, see, I am extending peace to her like a river. Eventually, right? It's not the Jerusalem we know today, but eventually all things are going to be restored, and she will become again the center of the whole world. And the esteem of the nations like a flowing stream. And you shall feed, and you shall be carried on the side, and be fondled on. And he's given us, the picture of a mother, carrying her baby, breastfeeding her baby, bouncing the baby on the knees. As one whom his mother comforts, so I comfort you. Well, who's he talking to? The ones who were hated, who got out. That's who he's been talking to. And in Jerusalem, you are comforted. In the kingdom is when we'll be comforted. Verse 14, and you shall see, and your heart shall rejoice, and your bones flourish as tender grass. And the hand of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh shall be known to his servants, to both flocks. Because what's coming out of this destruction? The Netzarim, the children, are being sent out to do what? We're going to find out in a second, to get both flocks. But it's already been told to us in chapter 56 and the other chapter we just looked at in Isaiah about him being the light of the nations, that he is going to get the nations and he is going to restore the house of Israel. It shall be known to his servants, to both flocks. Yeshua says, I have this flock and I have others I must bring, and I must take the two flocks and make them one. So while this will be known, the hand of Yah will be known to his servants, both flocks, but his displeasure will be known to his enemies. Well, who are his enemies? The scribes, the priests, the leaders, the whole story that we see in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Those are the enemies. And they've been enemies since the days of Isaiah all the way beyond. This is what the story of Isaiah 66 is truly about. It doesn't end there, because here's verse 15. It says, for look, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh comes with fire. Now, I know. So many people look at this and they say, because they just take this verse by itself and say, look, this is the coming of the Lord, coming with fire to judge the whole world. And no, that's not the context of everything we just read. Everything we just read is the gospel story, in the order that the gospel story actually happens, in the order that the book of Revelation says it's going to happen, centering around the birth pangs that lead to the destruction of Jerusalem and the sending out of the Netzarim all over the world. So this coming with fire is not what we think it is. It is important. It is the coming of the Lord, but not the second coming of the Master. For look, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh comes with fire. Luke chapter 12 and verse 49 says, I came to bring fire, and I wish that it was already here, he says. I can't remember where. I'm thinking maybe in John, where John says, I baptize with water, but one comes after me who will baptize with the Holy Spirit and with fire. And he will bring in the wheat into his barn, but he will burn up the chaff. He's going to let the Netzarim be birthed and send them out, but he's going to burn up the chaff, those of the temple, those who are his enemies. That's what's being talked about in the Gospels, and that's what's being talked about here. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh comes with fire and with his chariots. Now, we expect that to be, he's in the sky and we see his chariot and he's coming and there's fire and it's, the whole, Spielberg, type of movie thing. And it's, it's just this wonderful visual thing. What he's talking about is Rome. He's talking about a locust army that's coming to burn and to pillage and fire and billows of smoke and the destruction and the burning of the temple and the gold melting and every stone being turned down. That's what he's referring to here. Like a whirlwind, again, the Roman army, the locust army of Revelation, to render his displeasure with burning. and his rebuke with flames of fire. Again, burn the chaff, bring in the wheat. Now, I'm skipping a couple of verses here. Actually, not this one. It's the next verse, but I'm going to skip a couple of verses. No, actually, I think I'll go all the way through this. Verse 16 says, for by fire and by his sword, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, shall judge all flesh. Now, by all flesh, it doesn't mean the whole world, because that's not what this is talking about. This isn't talking about the coming of Messiah, dealing with the beast and dealing with the false prophet. That's not what this is talking about. He's dealing with the temple. When he says the whole earth, he means the land, the whole earth. There's times when he says the whole earth and he means the whole earth, but in this context, he's talking about Jerusalem. That's been the context of the story right from the beginning. For by his word and by his sword, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh shall judge all flesh, Israel, the temple. Because guys, it wasn't just Jerusalem that gets destroyed. It's all the cities of Israel that get destroyed. And it wasn't just the cities in Israel. It was Jews all over the Roman Empire that are going to suffer because of this. And it's all the Gentiles who attach themselves to the Netzarim, who are scattered all over the Roman Empire. This isn't just what Rome's about to do to Jerusalem, doesn't just affect Jerusalem. Obviously, that is the key issue here. This affects everything within the Roman Empire and changes history as we know it. For verse 16, for by the fire and by his sword, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh shall judge all flesh, and the slain of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh shall be many. This is what's referred to in Revelation when he says he churns the winepress of the wrath of God, and the blood that's let out goes up to the bridle of a horse. This is what he's talking about. Or in Matthew, he says, wherever the body is, there the vultures will be. So much death, so much meat for these birds to eat. That's what's being talked about here. And the slain of the Lord, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, shall be many. Verse 17. Those who set themselves apart. Now, this is important because you'd read this and you'd say, well, who's he talking about here? This is not the second coming of the Lord. Who sets themselves apart? Well, the word Pharisee means to set oneself apart. They thought of themselves as that piece of dough that's pulled out of the main lump and is separate and distinct. And that's why they came up with all the different rules and the washings and the ceremonies and all the things that became a burden, because they wanted to be separate, different. Well, he's talking about those who set themselves apart. By definition, that's Pharisee, to be separate, and cleanse themselves at the gardens after the one in the midst. He's talking about idolatry, all the way from the time of Isaiah, all the way to the time of Yeshua. Who, eating the flesh of pigs and the abominations of the mouse, unclean foods. Guys, he's not talking about the Gentiles eating this stuff, because they're eating this stuff, right? They don't know. They have no idea yet. He says, I'm going to send my word out to a people who do not know me. He's talking about judging the people who know him. They were doing this from the time of Isaiah all the way through, eating the unclean, being part of idolatry. This is the context of what's being said. This isn't Yah coming back at the end of the age and judging all that. Not to say he's not going to. Obviously, that's going to be part of the judgment, but that's not what this is talking about. We've got to be careful not to add to it or extrapolate beyond what's actually being said. The slain of the Lord shall be many, verse 17, but those who set themselves apart and cleanse themselves at the gardens after one in the midst, eating the flesh of pigs and the abomination of the mouse, are snatched away together. This is what Messiah is talking about when he says one is taken, the other is left. This is a snatching, a carrying away. One is taken to judgment and died. One is left. One escapes. Pray that your flight be not in winter. On a Sabbath day, go out into the mountains. 3.5 years you're going to have to wait for all of this stuff to settle down before you come back even to Jerusalem. And they do. About 3.5 years later, they come back to Jerusalem. This is what he is talking about here. Those people will be snatched away burnt. They are the chaff that is going to be burnt. The temple is going to be burnt. Judgment is going to fall on the whole house of Israel, all over the land, from Nazareth all the way down to Jerusalem and beyond, and even beyond the land of Israel. This is going to affect people, all temples, synagogues, all over the world, all over the Roman world. Declares Yod He Vav He. Verse 18, and I, because of their works and their imaginations, am coming to gather all nations and tongues. Guys, I put it in red because this is important. Listen to what he's saying, and this is how you know this is not about, there's a whole bunch of ways you know this is not about the second coming. This is about what has already happened from our perspective, prophecy from Isaiah's perspective, prophecy from Yeshua's perspective, but from our perspective, history. What happens at the destruction of Jerusalem and the whole house of Israel? The Netzarim and the Jews are scattered, and this word goes out to the world. This is what the master is saying. Because of what they've done, because of the judgment that has to be put upon them, because of these birth pangs that are coming and a new nation that is being born, because of their wicked imaginations, I am coming to gather all nations and all tongues. This is what's been going on for the last 2,000 years. Now, there's more to the story when you add the beast and the prophet, but that's a different story. We're not talking about that. We're talking about just what Isaiah is referring to right here. The word goes out to all nations after. Now, the word went out to Gentiles beforehand. We're going to see that in just a couple of minutes. But the first 100 years, predominantly the people who were believers were Jews. It's not until the mid to the end of the 2nd century into the 3rd century that Gentiles, the nations, outnumber Jewish believers and wind up taking over this thing and making it something it was never intended to be. Thus the difference between what was then called Christian and what was called Netzarim. But another story for another day. Verse 19, and I shall set a sign among them and shall send some of them who escape. Well, who escapes? Who gets out? The Netzarim get out. To do what? To go to the nations. Listen to what it says. And I shall set a sign, an ensign among them, and shall send some of those who escape, the Netzarim, where? To the nations. This is history. This is not the second coming. This is history. Send them to the nations. And then it begins to list the nations, Tarshish and Pul and Lud, who draw the bowl, and Tubal and Yawan and the coastlands. Those are the nations of that day. But extrapolate this out to 2,000 years. It's to Italy, it's to France, it's to Germany, it's to Russia, it's to America, it's to China, it's to India, it's to all of the nations. Those who are afar off. The coastlands afar off, who have not heard my report, nor seen my esteem. Who didn't hear Moses? Who have no idea of the first 5 books, who have no idea of the prophets, who have no idea of the gospel story, who have no idea of the God of Israel. These people are sent to tell the world about the God of Israel. And they, the children, remember Revelation 12, the children who keep his commandments and have the testimony of Yeshua, shall declare my glory among the nations. Guys, this is what Isaiah 66 is about. And actually, if you read the next verse, I didn't even put it in there, but if you need you read the next verse, it talks about the scattered ones of the house of Israel too, also being brought back. I say all of this so that you understand this outline that we've gone over as an introduction is everywhere. It's everywhere. Guys, we can go back to Moses, and we will at some point go back to Moses and read this same outline. It is everywhere, and we need to understand it to correctly put it in its historical context, in its prophetic context, because if we don't, then we don't know who we are. We don't know when we are. We don't know what's supposed to be expected of us, and then we come up with all sorts of religious stuff that we do today. All right, so all of that To somebody wrote on there, I never had pain in giving birth. Well, good for you, Sister Sylvia. That's awesome. That is awesome. Most women, I think, would probably disagree with you. Jerusalem would probably disagree with you, but more power to you, sister. It just caught my eye as I was looking at the chat there. That's awesome. All right, so I say all of this, especially with regard to going out to the nations, because it starts, right off the bat, within 10, 12 years of Messiah's death. That's when Peter is told to take, eat, and kill from the sheet that comes down to go to the Gentiles. But it's obviously Peter is not really sent to the Gentiles. His main ministry is to the lost sheep, is to Jews, is to the house of Israel, all 12 tribes that are scattered abroad. Which is really interesting that when you read 1st and 2nd Peter, no, he's not writing to Gentiles. He is writing explicitly to Jews. Where Thessalonians, well, we'll see what happens in Thessalonia. Is he writing to Jews or is he writing to Gentiles? We went over some of this last week. Here's Acts chapter 17, verse 4, which is the introduction, if you would, in the book of Acts of when Saul and Silas and Timothy finally wind up in Thessalonica. Here's Acts chapter 17 and verse 4. This is the story when they get there. I didn't give every verse. I kind of skipped around just for time's sake. Number one, it says, and having passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was, here it is, where did they go? To the synagogue of the Jews. So who's Paul, starting off his ministry with? The Jews. Skip on down to verse 4, and it says, and some of them, the Jews, did believe, and a large number of the worshiping Greeks, and not a few of the leading women joined Shaul and Silas. Now, when you read that, and it says a large number of the worshiping Greeks, there's a couple of questions that pop up in my mind. This is how I would initially interpret this if I didn't have other information. If he's saying a great number of worshiping Greeks, meaning Gentiles, also went to the synagogue, also listened to what Paul was doing. And obviously there was more than just teaching going on, maybe healings, maybe other things as well. But are these proselytes that he's talking about? Because that's what it seems like to me if it says a large number of worshiping Greeks. Are these Greeks worshiping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Are they proselytes or are they God-fearers? Proselytes, again, would be converts that have gone through the whole halakha all the way up to the circumcision, remembering the Torah and all the rest of that, where God-fearers didn't have to go through all of that, but they kept, the 7 Noahide laws. They were converts. They didn't have to do all of that, but they were still considered righteous Gentiles. Now remember, Yeshua already said about converts, you make them twice as much the son of the lake of fire. So either way, whether it's proselytes, whether it's God-fearers, as the worshiping Greeks, they're still in a bad predicament, right? As far as the master's definition. But the worshiping Greeks can also mean something else. See, the Greeks were also a people of worship, a people of religion. And they worshiped many gods, a pantheon of gods, of Roman and Greek gods, or really the Greek gods first, and then the Romans later, which is really just the same pantheon, different names, same concept, especially the chief one, the sun god. Idols, right? So which one is it? Is he talking about God-fearers and proselytes, or is he talking about pagans, people who worship many, many other gods? They were worshiping Greeks. But they heard this story of the God of Israel who came and became a man, died and rose again, and saw the signs and wonders and came to the synagogue to hear it. That would definitely, for the Jews, if you read the rest of Acts chapter 17, you can almost understand in one sense why the rest of the Jews who didn't believe, because obviously some Jews did believe, but there were many who didn't, and they got, excuse my French, but they got pissed off when they saw all of these, if they are pagans coming in, or if they are proselytes coming in. Here's that word. It's in the Greek, it's number 4576. This is the word for worshiping Greeks. And it's the word sebomai. I think that's how you say it. Sebomai, the E sound at the end. It's a verb, and it means to revere, to adore, to be devout, to be religious, and to worship. So it doesn't give an indication, and it doesn't say what they're worshiping in Acts chapter 17, verse 4. It just says they are worshiping Greeks. So what are they? Who are they? Well, here's 1Thessalonians. We're going to pick up verse 5. This is a little bit review, a couple of verses review, but this will make more sense to you if we start here. It says, because our good news did not come to, this is Paul talking to the Thessalonians. He gives this whole greeting. He says, because our good news did not come to you in word only, but also in power. So it sounds like other things were going on, right? Maybe healings, maybe some other miraculous things that Yahweh was using the apostles for, but also in power and in the set apart spirit and in entire confirmation, as you know what kind of men we were among you for your sake. And you became imitators of us and of the master, having received the word in much pressure. So we talked about this yesterday. He's talking about tribulation. There's hardships that these people faced because they received the word with joy and the set apart spirit. So, tribulation, just look at Saul's life, from the floggings, the beatings, get kicked out of the synagogue, stoned, shipwrecked. This guy just had, just one tribulation after the other, as many other apostles did as well. But we get his story as the main story. Family and friends rejecting him. That's the tribulation Yeshua said was coming. Now, that's what would be coming to a Jew who is being kicked out of his own synagogues for the name of Yeshua. What would happen to Gentiles who stopped worshiping all the pantheon of gods that their mother and father and grandfather and great-grandfather and was their national identity? What would happen to those Greeks who stopped worshiping the pantheon of gods and instead began to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who came and died and rose again? See, the Greeks, the Gentiles, there was a hatred, certainly that's coming from the unbelieving Jews that would have come at them. And you see that in Acts chapter 17. They hated not just Paul and them, they hated the other people, everybody that came, the Gentiles that came. They despised them all. They followed them all the way to Berea. And they would consider them pagans. They would consider them goyim. So they wouldn't want them in their synagogues. They wouldn't want them amongst their people. They're goyim. Today, they're goyim. We don't want anything to do with them. But those of their own families, there would have had religious animosity, felt betrayed by their loved ones who left what had been their familial gods, their family idols, their family worship that had gone on for generations, now choose to worship with, from their perspective. And here's the thing, we would have, many of us can probably relate to this coming from a Gentile background. How many have had the experience of having other people that we know, that we love, that we've grown up with, that we may have had religious affiliation with, when we start to truly follow Yah the way the instruction gives us? How many have heard the term, what are you guys, Jews now? Are you guys Jews? And that's always said with disdain. It's always said with putting ones down as with displeasure. And so can you imagine? So yes, the Jews are going through tribulation. Everything Yeshua said would happen, but so are the Gentiles, right? They're losing a lot too. They're not. They're gaining more, obviously, as well as the Netzarim, but they're losing a lot. Think about what they must have gone through in their culture to follow the Master. Well, here's verse 7. It says, so that you became an example to all who believe in Macedonia and in Achaia, for from you the word of the Master has sounded. In other words, whatever happened in Thessalonica, whatever this group of worshiping Greeks and Jews who came as well, was so remarkable. It was so incredible. Word of this got out everywhere. Not only in Macedonia and Achaia, but also in every place your belief towards Elohim has gone out, so that it is unnecessary for us to say whatever. For they themselves report what kind of reception we had with you. And here it is. Look at it in red. It's in red. It's bold. It's big. Listen to this. and how you turned to Elohim from idols to serve the living and true Elohim, the God of Israel. Boom, we got it. Now we know. We know for sure now that when Acts tells us that they are worshiping Greeks, he's not talking about, and maybe there are proselytes in there, maybe there are righteous Gentiles in there, God-fearers in there. But what it's actually saying is the bulk of people who started coming to the synagogue to hear Saul teach and to see the miracles and everything that was going on, these were pagan worshiping idols. These were people with no connection. This is the beginning, the fulfillment of what Isaiah said needs to happen that could not happen under the Pharisees. This is not making them twice as much the sons of Gehenna. This is setting them free. And these are people who are turning from their idol worship, now turning to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to wait for his son from the heavens. Now, I've run out of time. I'm going to have to stop it here. We're going to pick this up the next time we get there, but I want to leave you with a question here. And of course you got the notes, so you guys can go ahead and just check out the notes and you'll know what the cliffhanger is. But here's the cliffhanger. He says, and to wait for his son from the heavens. Is he talking about the second coming? Is that what he's because he's saying you guys just left your idols, you came, I know you're going through all sorts of tribulation, and you've turned to the living God, to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to wait for the Son from heavens. Is he referring to the second coming in glory, on the clouds, angels, shofar, resurrection, all east, all the four corners of the earth? Is that what he's talking about? Maybe. Maybe not. Whom he raised from the dead, Yeshua, who is delivering us from the wrath to come. Again, the question is, and I'll leave you with this for tonight, what wrath is he talking about? Is he referring to Messiah coming and resurrection and being delivered from the wrath of, let's say, the white throne, the resurrection, the general resurrection, the white throne judgment? Or is he referring to another day of wrath? And we don't have time to go through the rest of this. I'm going to leave you on that little bit of a cliffhanger. It's actually a pretty big cliffhanger, but we'll leave it there. We'll go through the notes. We're going to really explore this because this is a question that must be answered. Because if it's not answered correctly, if we skew our understanding, then everything else we do after this gets skewed as well. And what happens is the error gets compounded over and over and over as time goes on. And this is why it is so important to go back and get the correct definitions first and stick to those correct definitions and then have them pan out throughout the story. And it's going to change. I'm telling you guys, this is going to change the way you look at the scripture. This is going to change the story that you thought you know. This is going to change everything you think that you're hearing from quote unquote prophecy teachers and all the rest of that. And listen, people are trying to do their best job. I get it. They're doing the best job they can with the information they've got, but there's more information that we need to understand. And honestly, most of it is right there in the text. If you understand some of history and you take what Yeshua says verbatim, a whole different story gets told. So we'll leave it right there for tonight, guys. I'm sorry to leave you on a cliffhanger, but I've run out of time. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I really appreciate it. I want to invite you guys this upcoming weekend. We're going to have a dinner. They're going to be celebrating my birthday. They're going to be doing Pastor's Appreciation. Awesome stuff. Really, really appreciate it from our congregation. But we're also going to be taking the Lord's Supper. And we'd like to invite our LMC family that are in different states, even in different countries. When the service is over and we go downstairs to do our fellowship, we're going to take the Lord's Supper together. And we'd like for you to join us on Zoom. So you get your bread together, make some unleavened bread, get some wine, get some grape juice, and we'll have you guys on a Zoom call with us so that we can all take Yah's Supper together. We all take the Master's Supper together and fellowship like that. And plus, a lot of our congregation here in the Bronx and get a chance to see some of you guys, and you guys can see some of us. Maybe we get some testimonies in, or whatever it is that Yah has on your heart to say. And so we invite you. We're going to let the information out probably like on Friday, maybe even Saturday, in a notification. If you'd like to join us, we would love to have you and to hear from you guys. So we invite you to be part of our celebration. Also, guys, we're going to have up soon, very, very soon, all of our tabernacles information. And also for those that want to be part of our Passover celebration, it's already up on our app. You can join. You can go to the app, get all the information. We're going to call it Passover of the Nations. It's going to be very different than we've ever done before. It's not going to be the traditional Passover the way we've done it in the past. You know, we're growing, we're learning, we're understanding. New things are being added, other things are being taken away, but it's going to be fun no matter what. So we invite you to all of those things. I think that's the last commercial for today, except for if you have not yet subscribed, please subscribe. Be part of what we do here. Send this message out to other people. Thank you for your support, for your physical support, your emotional support, your prayer support, your financial support. It allows us to do what we do. And guys, ultimately, don't forget to pray for Sister Lily Estrada as she heals in the hospital. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. Guys, have a wonderful, wonderful evening. God bless. And as always, shalom.